All right, good evening, everyone. Calling together a special meeting this Tuesday, November 19th, 2024. We're going to start with roll call. Yolanda Spinola,
Present.
James Sweeney,
Here.
Matthew Gallagher,
Here.
Tony Gonzalez, present. All right.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Marty, I'm trying to get Marty on. I guess she got the wrong link, so I'm working on getting her on now.
Okay, if she could, Rob will promote her once she signs
Okay.
it. Just thank you, Isaiah. We'll continue. So the agenda is to review some proposed zoning change, and I'm going to kick it over to Mr. May.
So, Madam Chairwoman, excuse me, we are having a public hearing this evening to discuss a proposed zoning amendment that is sitting before City Council right now. For those who are watching at home, when a proposed amendment is introduced into City Council, it is referred to two locations. One is to the Planning Board for a public hearing, and then to the Ordinance Committee for a public hearing. Both bodies need to refer the amendment out favorably, and then there will be two more readings of the ordinance before the City Council, and then at that point, if it's adopted, it becomes law. Let me move this out of the way. Sorry. So I'm going to share my screen. Oops. All right, I hope everybody can see this slide. We are here to discuss the form-based code that is before City Council currently. Our agenda this evening, we'll do welcomes and introductions. We'll go through the plan process and the timeline. We'll talk a little bit more about the form-based code in detail, and then what our next steps are. So just for welcomes and introductions, again, I'm Rob May. I'm Director of Planning and Economic Development for the City of Brockton. And joining us this evening is Emily Ennis of Ennis Associates, and Paula Martinez from Ennis Associates, who are the consultants that we've hired to help us through this process. And then DeRay, Ali, and Isaiah are here from the planning staff. So thank you guys for joining us. We've had several people working on this project in multiple organizations. As you can see, here are the folks from Ennis Associates and the city staff. Evan Sears has been also a lead partner on this from the Brockton Planning Department. He unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, he's enjoying some time off and is in Japan, so he should be having a much better time than we are this evening. We also have had representatives from Mass Development, which is the state's economic development finance agency, and from Mass Housing, which is, and she's actually the Mass Housing Partnership, which is a nonprofit organization that supports housing activities throughout the Commonwealth. So, how did we get here? In 2022, the Commonwealth passed what is called the MBTA Communities Act. It's MBTA, it's MGL Chapter 40, A, Section 3A. And it requires that all communities that have some level of MBTA service are required to provide for multi-residential, multi-unit housing of a certain of an area size that would support at least 15 units per acre. And I'll let Emily talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but we must comply by December 31st, 2024. And we've had some assistance from the Commonwealth, Mass Housing Partnership, and Mass Development. And they've been very beneficial in helping us bring on consultants, do the analysis that we need to do, and bring us to this point. So as you saw, the ordinance was, the law was passed in 2022, and the city went about analyzing our current zoning to see if we were already in compliance with the ordinance or with the state law. And we found that we were not in compliance. And so we pulled together a staff plan to become compliant that was submitted to the Commonwealth and approved. And then part of that process was to engage the public and elected officials to develop a zoning proposal that would bring us into compliance. We've had 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 public meetings or more, and 6 public encounters, I'm calling them, where we've gone out to meet the public, whether it's at the annual seniors lunch or the Cape Verdean Festival or back to school events. But we've been out on the road and getting as much public opinion and participation as possible. And once we've developed we've learned the community's vision for what we're trying to see here, we found that our current ordinance isn't enough. And so we thought it would be best to propose a new form-based code, starting with new districts and regulations on those in those districts that would bring us into compliance. And right now we're looking at the downtown and Trout Brook area, and then the Campello station area. Up to this point, there's been several meetings up until this point. As we said, June 13th was our was a code for citywide form-based code workshop. And then on September 17th, we had our citywide form-based code presentation, where we rolled out our first draft of the ordinance before submitting it to City Council. And then we're here today on the 19th to have our planning board public hearing. Emily or Paula, I would like to have you jump in and talk a little bit about the engagement process. I thought it was very imaginative what you guys have come up with. You might be able to see on the table their little box models that the community was working with to help express the character of neighborhoods and the heights of buildings and the density of neighborhoods. And then also, once you're done with that, if you could go on to a little bit about what form-based code is and who else is doing it in Massachusetts and why it's becoming much more popular these days. So Emily?
Happy to, Rob. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm excited to be here. For the record, again, Emily Ennis of Ennis Associates. One of the things that I think is particularly exciting about your efforts to look at updating the zoning is the ability to work with the community and particularly two communities, the downtown area and the Campello area, to really figure out what the vision is and how the zoning can support that vision. Zoning's not an easy thing for people who deal with it on a regular basis. It's even less easy for people to visualize if they don't deal with zoning at all. And so, as Rob said, we tried to make it more real, more closer to kind of a physical representation of what zoning could be by using these models that would indicate how much where on a site. These were tied to parcels, how much building, how much open space, the different types of uses. It's particularly good for a community like Brockton to do this, where people have very definite visions and hopeful and exciting visions about what they want the future to be. So we ran this workshop. We had already pulled from the downtown planning that's been done in the past, the Trout Brook planning and the Campello planning. This was kind of the bit where we brought all that visioning together and asked people to tell us what they thought about it. And from there, because these models are scaled to particular sizes, both parcel and building sizes, that helps us figure out what the form-based code should be. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about what form-based code is and how it's different from what your existing zoning is, which is something called Euclidean zoning. And Euclidean zoning is named after a city in Ohio, and it was when uses first started to be segregated from each other. So we used to be in very mixed use environments because of fires, because of other reasons such as industrial uses. We split. That was Euclidean zoning. Now many communities are moving back to the mix of uses we had in the past, but with different levels of control. So Rob, if you go to the next slide, please. So why think about form-based code? Form-based code provides benefits to everybody in the process. When you think of an application process, somebody is coming forward to do something with their land. They're either as of right and they can go get a building permit, or they require some sort of site plan review or special permit to do what they want to do. And at all points, there's an option for the applicant to interact with the city boards and departments to interact with the applicant, and the public to have a voice either in the setting up of the zoning, which is what we've been doing, or in its implementation, which is the permitting process. So a form-based code, because of its emphasis on what the buildings will look like, how they will sit on the lot more closely than a Euclidean code will do, or more specifically, and how they relate to the street and the environment that people are moving through, it gives a lot more control and it gets a lot more predictability. And so the idea of creating this zoning process is to provide that level of predictability, that level of understanding of what the end result will be. So developers, of course, like it because they like predictability. They like knowing that if they're going to make an investment, they're going to get something by right. They're going to get the density that they're looking for. They're going to have flexibility on uses, on flexibility on understanding the requirements of the city in terms of standards and the timeline. There's less discretionary discussion because everything that would otherwise have been discretionary has been put into the code based on public comment. Really, so that benefits developers. It also benefits the city because you know what you're applying. You know the parameters around the discussion. You've got illustrations. You've got images that help you and the developer have a conversation. Those same components, those same criteria work well for residents. Residents frequently aren't regular participants in the development process. They don't often know what to expect, especially with Euclidean zoning, which is heavily text-based, hard to understand if you don't have that legal background. So with the components of a form-based code, it makes it easier for them to understand what's going to happen. Form-based codes, because they're about the buildings, what they look like, their relationship to the street, the mix of uses, it leads to more walkable neighborhoods. We structure it so there's more of an opportunity for different housing types, different building types, and it gets to be more accessible and for community members. And then with the focus in this form-based code on climate resiliency, you're looking at a better environment for future changes that we expect to see. Next slide, Rob, please. So what that starts to look like is going to be very different from what you have now. This is obviously your existing zoning map. I know, Rob, you've referred to it throughout the process as sort of the big paintbrush, and these blocks of color are very large. They're very broad, and they don't really allow for tailoring to what's on the what actually exists now. And in a community like Brockton, in many of our communities in New England, we have a lot of existing buildings, historic buildings, buildings that the community values both because of the built history, but also kind of the emotional ties to those buildings, what it represents about the city's culture and past. And I think that's one of the many reasons that form-based code is becoming more popular. So Lowell was actually, the city of Lowell was the first to have a form-based code in Massachusetts. City of Somerville has a full form-based code. Pittsfield has an area that has a form-based code attached to it. What I think is interesting is, although this is started in the cities, there are many towns in Massachusetts that are starting to add form-based codes to downtown areas in particular to try and create the exact sort of walkable environment, resilient environment we've been talking about. So Littleton's Village Common area has a form-based code. Northampton, Situate, Medway, Norwood, Danvers, and Air. Harvard was looking to do one. Hamilton's working on one now. The Cape Cod Commission has actually done a study of form-based code to try and encourage all of the communities on Cape Cod to look at form-based code. So it's a growing movement. And if you go to the next page, Rob, I'll show you what it starts to look like. So you've got this broad brush. Now you see a lot of spots of color. And that's because we're able to, there we go. That's the one I wanted to show. We're able to show, we're able to look at what's on the ground now, identify what the community wants to keep because it has a certain value to the community based on the history, on the culture, and what is something that we want to change. And we can apply specific districts to those geographic areas to get the desired result over time. Zoning is always about options, it's about potential, it's long-term. So as we look at the districts on the left-hand side, you'll see neighborhood residential, urban residential, 3 different types of mixed-use district: commercial, commercial business. So commercial core is very much downtown, commercial business, commercial industry, and civic. This allows us to be very precise with how we're targeting the zoning. They'll have different uses associated with them, different dimensional standards. And when you compare the middle image, which is the downtown Trout Brook area, with the image on the right, which is Campello, you can see that these same zoning districts are arranged in different ways depending on the neighborhood that you're working with. And what's great about the form-based code is we can sit there and say, okay, we've got this district area. It has these sub-districts that are controlling the dimensional standards, controlling the building types, which is different from Euclidean zoning, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, controlling the uses. But within these neighborhoods, we can also modify the zoning to be specific to that neighborhood. So a mixed use 2 in Campello might have some differences from a mixed use 2 in the downtown. So we've got 2 ways of being specific to the needs and the vision of each neighborhood. So if you go to the next one, the sub areas. So that shows 2 other areas that we're working on now. We're bringing forward downtown Trout Brook and Campello to you today. We're working on a neighborhood plan for Montello, and we have done a land use plan for Levitt Brook. We're looking at the zoning that's in front of you and will be in front of the city council to see how those could be applicable to those 2 areas as well, based on the vision that we're hearing from the community. And so if you go to the next slide, I used the previous slides to introduce both the districts and the idea of form-based code. So I'm going to go to the next slide for the building types. Rob, do you want us to continue, or do you want to take on for the building types?
I'm going to start here, if you don't mind.
Beautiful. Yep.
Oh, if you remember the original maps that showed the city and the current zoning, I refer to it as somebody came in with a big paint roller and just washed over the city, regardless of what was there, uh, and whether it was going to conform or not. This was somebody's idea in 1965. Well, a lot's changed since 1965. And form-based code allows us to be much more precise. And I often joke that this new map is paint by numbers. And so it looks at each individual parcel, what is there on the land now. Does that conform with the community's vision of what the community wants this area to look like in the future? If not, then it gets zoned to a what we call an aspirational zoning. And so there's areas where we want to see change and we want to encourage change. That doesn't mean that the existing use there is going to be blown up by space lasers. No, it means that it's there as a non-conforming use. And 9 out of 10 times, most of the uses in the city are already non-conforming because our zoning ordinance was put together in such a way that made 90% of the city non-conforming to begin with. So nobody is being penalized, but there are now properties that are being incentivized to be redeveloped to match the character of the community that we're looking for. So here we are downtown with the MBTA train station. This is the police headquarters. City Hall is right here. This is the BAT terminal. And you'll see Main Street, North Main Street, Legion, whoops. And it's going the wrong direction. Pleasant Street, Court Street, West Elm, Crescent Street. So it gives you an idea. Elliott Street is on the north side, and White and Allen Street are on the south side. So it gives you an idea of the breadth and scope of downtown where we're looking. And then in the Campello area, this is the area that we've just done a master plan for that was approved by this very planning board. And it starts at Nielsen on the north side, comes all the way down to the border with East Bridgewater, or with one of the Bridgewaters. You can see the MBTA train running through here with the MBTA Campello train station. This is Main Street. This is Montello. And it's a continuation of Main Street. So each color that you see here represents a new base district. And so just like the Euclidean zoning, where you have a residential district, you have a commercial district, you have an industrial district, we have base districts also. So you'll have residential districts, and they're broken down into smaller categories where you have a neighborhood residential and an urban residential. Neighborhood residential is a little bit more less dense, 1, 2, and 3 unit homes. Urban residential is 4 to 8 units. There's, as Emily said, there's 3 mixed use districts. The major difference between those is the height of the buildings and the amount of active storefront, active facade that we need to see facing the street. And let us move into the different districts. Oh, the building types. So I'm sorry, I need to take a step back. So in each district, in each base district, there is not only a list of permitted uses, just like Euclidean zoning, we now have a list of building forms or building types. That's how we get the form-based code name that are allowed in that district. And each one of those building types has a specific set of requirements. So every parcel in the city should be buildable under form-based code, but you might not be able to build what you want. Depends on how much property you have to make it work. So this is an example of a layout that we've set aside. This happens to be the row house. And you can see in our, I hope you can you see my mouse? I hope. This box lets you know which district it's allowed in, and it's a row house is allowed by special permit in a neighborhood residential district, and it's allowed by right in an urban residential district. These are some examples of what row houses look like, just in case you don't speak English very well. This gives you an example of what to look for. There are building components that go on with various structures. Those are awnings and dormers and porches and canopies. And those all change by building type and by building district. And then we come into the bulk, the lot requirements for each particular parcel. And you can see here you have A, B, and C. If you look down here at the diagram, you have A, B, and C that match up here. So it makes it very easy for people to pay attention and understand, what do you mean by lot width? What do you mean by lot coverage? There's a diagram that goes along with it. So it makes it very easy to understand. This first page deals with regulations for the lot and the parking on those lots. And then the next page goes on and talks about the particular type of building. And so what are the requirements for those units, the depth of the units, what's the maximum height that can be there in stories, how much ground floor elevation does there need to be for a residential structure, and all of that is explained very well in these diagrams. And so each building type has a diagram that goes along with it that helps Brockton residents and Brockton builders understand what they're getting themselves into. We talked about the different residential districts. Right now, we're proposing 2 very different residential districts: neighborhood residential, which again is 1, 2, and 3 story buildings, 1, 2, and 3 unit buildings, and then urban residential, which is a little bit more dense, a little taller, and that allows for 4 to 8 units. Excuse me. When you're talking about townhomes, it goes to 8 units. And in the individual districts, you'll see as it breaks out, this is the residential district, neighborhood residential. Again, here are the types of buildings that are allowed. And these are examples of the 3 different kinds of buildings. Now, we're not talking about an architectural style or a particular method of construction. We're talking about, is it a 1-family, a single unit detached? Is it a duplex? Duplexes can be side by side or up and down, but they're generally 2 units. And then 3-decker, 3 units. Most of the time you'll see them as a 3-decker. Sometimes you might see 2 apartments up and down and 2 apartments back and forth to give you sort of an L-shaped building. But it's a maximum of 3 units on that parcel. Urban residential, again, we have detached 3s, which is, again, the triple-decker, but then it includes multiplex. It also includes a historic conservation or conservation, which is we have some very large, almost mansion type homes, but nobody really lives like that anymore. And how can those homes be preserved, be brought up to historic standards, but be allowed to convert into additional, more dense residential use so that the owner can afford to invest in those properties? We have 3 mixed uses districts, MX1, MX2, and MX3. And this is where they are mapped throughout the city. You can see the higher density MX3 is close to the train station and in the beginning of the Lovett Brook, or excuse me, the Trout Brook area. Again, more density down at the train station, along the train tracks. And then there is a progression, natural progression of less dense to higher density as you move up towards the center of downtown. This is the YMCA. It's zoned at a slightly higher density because that's the style of building that's already there. You might remember there's an older historic section that is 4 stories, 5 stories, excuse me. And so we want to be able to preserve that and make it usable. Right now, it would not be usable for mixed use development. So this would allow that to become a by right use. Again, this is down by the MBTA station in Campello. There's areas that are in between Montello and Main Street that would support a medium density development, while along Main Street that backs up onto the residential neighborhood, there's a lower density mixed use district, and that allows for a 3-story building with active ground floor uses. And so in the mixed districts, you'll see, and I'm sorry, I have got to move this cursor. The menu bar is in the middle of what I'm trying to look at. So in the mixed use districts, you're allowed, there are 3 different types of buildings that are constructible. There's the all residential building, which is a condo or a apartment building. There is a mixed use building that usually has residential above and ground floor commercial, usually retail. And then there are commercial buildings, which are all office or commercial uses. Sometimes you may have retail on the first floor, but these buildings generally do not allow for residential uses. In this case, they do not allow for residential uses. MX1 allows for a 4-story building and allows for a building close to the front, close to a setback line that allows us to widen the sidewalks throughout downtown on our busier streets and allows for improvement in green space. Switch over. MX2, a little higher density. These buildings are generally 5 stories, and with using bonus density, you'll be able to go up to a 6-story building. There are additional uses that are allowed here because this allows for a higher density. There's residential building, a mixed use building type, commercial building, and a new building that we're adding here is laboratory or lab building. And then the 5th building that we didn't highlight here is what we're calling a civic building. And civic buildings are allowed in all districts. And so that might be a school, it might be a church, it might be the YMCA, it might be a library. Those are all considered civic buildings. So there's not a particular form that goes along with that that's representative of all of them. Mixed use 3, MX3, this is our highest density district that allows for residential, mixed use, commercial, lab, and now we enter into a new building form, which is called a podium and tower. Now, looking at that podium and tower, you're going to say, yeah, that's going to happen. Well, we're looking 50 years in the future with this zoning. So we don't want to preclude somebody from building this development when the market is right. So we want to encourage, at least let people know that in the future, this is something that we would accept. And having gone through all those community meetings, the neighbors have all agreed that this is a type of building form that would go in this area, which is very, very close to the MBTA stations and is primarily in downtown and close to the Campello MBTA train station. In our commercial industrial districts, we have 3 different versions. There is a commercial core, which is all commercial real estate, mostly office, some retail, but it does not allow residential development. We have a commercial business district with a CB. That's where you're going to find your box stores like a grocery store or a Walmart. Also your standalone stores like a CVS or a Burger King. And then there's a commercial industrial district, which allows for a mix of heavier use commercial activities and light industrial activities. And here you'll see there's some areas on Montello Street in downtown that are currently commercial industrial uses. We want to keep those in our community. Those are good paying jobs. And so we want to encourage their retention here in the city. Likewise, near the Trout Brook area, Evans Machine is over in this area. We want to encourage those high quality jobs. You'll see a commercial core downtown. This is the MBTA station and the police station. This is the BAT terminal and some of the property around that. We think that this would be a great location for lab buildings or higher intensity office uses. And then over here on this side, we have commercial business, CB. That is where the Vicentes is located. And that was an allowable use. I gotta move this cursor again. I'm sorry. Going in the wrong direction. In the Campello neighborhood, on the other side of the tracks, where you have Trojan and you have Crown Linen, or not Crown Linen. Drawing a blank, I'm sorry. I feel bad now. Those are industrial uses that we want to keep. Again, highway paying jobs. Further down along the Main Street corridor, we allow for more commercial industrial uses. We have a commercial box district where there's already a grocery store and some outlot buildings, but that's where we want to see those more car-centric activities. These are places where you would want to or need to drive to. And we don't have commercial core in the Campello neighborhood. So these are buildings that are allowed in the commercial core. So you'll have a commercial building, lab building, and a commercial block. And a commercial block sounds very much like a commercial building, but as the name implies, this is taking an entire city block, or at least half of the city block. It's very similar to a podium and tower building, except for there's no residential permitted in this building. So we're calling it commercial block to keep those separated. Commercial business allows for box buildings, like a grocery store, allows for a strip center. In the real estate business, we would call these inline spaces. And so you usually have your big box with a series of smaller inline real estate strip. And then out in front of it, you might have a freestanding commercial. Or in some cases in Brockton, you just have the freestanding commercial. This might be the Dunkin' Donuts that's downtown. Or the Cumbies further south. And then the buildings that are allowed in the commercial industrial, you'll see again, we have commercial building, which is all office activity, a lab type of building, which allows for a lot of varying uses, and then what we call a flex building. And these are generally industrial in nature. They're usually 1 to 2 stories, usually 1 story with a mezzanine that overlooks a shop area. They allow for a greater flexibility of uses. You'll usually see truck docks on the back sides of these buildings, but this is the kind of district where we want to encourage the job creation in these low density, light industrial uses. And then lastly, there are civic buildings, and you can see here some of the civic sites. This is the site of the new public safety building. You'll see parks here, City Hall, again, parks. These are all civic activities. Here's the courthouse and here's the Superior Courthouse, again, civic activities. And then in the Campello neighborhood, there are civic activities that are associated with Perkins Park. Excuse me, not Perkins Park. Keith Park, the city parking lots on South Street, and then areas along the river, which we would like to convert into open space to have a river walk that goes behind the rebuilt Campello Towers along the river and connects people up to the train station. And then this will connect up, another path will then connect up into the school center up in this area. So there's a series of also a series of development standards that go along with these uses. Instead of design guidelines, which are voluntary, these are design development standards, which are required. And this is what gives the community surety of what is going to be built there, how it's going to look, how it interfaces with the public realm, how it interfaces with the pedestrian, where the parking is going to be situated. It's all handled in this process. And there's two that I want to talk to you in general, and that is the green score and the did we include parking and mobility? I don't remember what the fourth one was, or the third one was, but let's just go into it. Oh, incentive zoning, I'm sorry, is the other thing that we wanted to talk about. So green score is a new way of figuring out how to landscape particular areas. We want to encourage denser multi-species development, multi-species plantings. And so you get credit for not only the tree, the improved soil, you get credit for the ground cover or the plantings that are on the site. And those all add up to create a much more rich and welcoming environment. It helps maintain and helps maintain stormwater runoff and control flooding. And it also provides, reduces the heat island effect as we get more and more climate change in the community. This softens up the overuse of pavement in our neighborhoods. And so there's a whole list of activities that you could do that you get points for, and there's multipliers for, and you can see here how this spreadsheet works. It's all calculates, but you know how much of the planted area in square feet, how much is going to be improved soil, how much is going to be landscaped flower beds, how many trees, are they shade trees, are they all those add up to a score, and we're asking people to get to a 3.5 is the optimal score, but 3.2 is the minimum score. And it's a relatively new concept here in Brockton, so it's not like we're going to see areas that are just all paved, all grass. We're looking for shrubs, we're looking for trees, we're looking for plantings, and this helps create a diverse ecosystem within the city. And then there's a whole section on administrative review, and I think I'm going to kick that back to Emily because I'm getting parched and I ramble, and she's much more coherent than I am. So take it away.
Thank you, Rob. So one of the things that I talked about in the beginning of my statements is the idea of predictability and time sensitivity for development, but also for city staff, elected and appointed officials and the public. Without clear review processes, sometimes development projects can drag on longer than they need to or they should do. So the standards help with that, but also setting up a review process that creates thresholds for different types of review. So we've got an administrative review process, site plan review, and special permit. The administrative and the site plan both deal with as of right uses. and it allows for differing layers of control depending on how many units, if it's residential, or how many square feet, if it's commercial, or a combination of the two, if it's mixed use. If it's under a certain threshold, then it can just go through the staff review process with the city planning department. If it goes above that, it comes to the planning board. If it rises to the level of a special permit, it comes to the planning board. And the idea is to give the appropriate level of control based on either the size or the use of the project, or combination of both, or if it's a use that requires additional concern by the city to ensure that there are appropriate modifications, mitigation to it, then it comes up to a special permit. So when you look at the review process, just realize that we've expanded it, and the idea is to streamline things. So things are coming to the planning board because they need to come to the planning board. Nonconformities. So I mentioned the historic aspect. Most of our New England cities and towns and the villages within them were built long before zoning came into play in the 30s, 40s, 50s, or even 60s in some communities. And to Rob's point about many of the properties being non-conforming already, that's a function of the historic development. So with non-conformities, what we're trying to do is create a pathway so that a property owner, whether residential or commercial, can invest in their property without having to go for a variance for every single option. So there's language in there that allows some flexibility, as long as you, the property owner, are not increasing an existing nonconformity. We've given a pathway to allow for that investment without overburdening the property owner. And then finally, incentive zoning. And I'm going to ask Rob, go to the next page, please. So we had mentioned, both myself and Rob, that the districts have different height allowances, and there's a base height and their maximum height. And in order to get to the maximum height, then the developer has to provide public amenities. They are getting an additional benefit in terms of a return on their investment. We'd like them to share some of that benefit with the public. So you'll see with Mix 1, Mix 2, Mix 3, and the commercial core, the base height is it's fine. It's low enough to achieve something, but the maximum height gives a much greater incentive. But the incentive zoning defines how they're going to achieve that. And if you turn to the next page, Rob, you'll see that we have a point system that's based for affordability. It's a percentage of the total units and the area median income. So for example, if you're going to give 20% of your total units as affordable at 60% or less, you're going to get 10 points, because that's worth a great deal to Brockton to have that. There's also public benefits for environmental resilience, community amenities, including those that are accessible to the public and privately maintained, or public realm improvements that are city maintained. So things like pedestrian seating, whether it's indoor or outdoor, open space, pocket parks, fountains, things that require operating costs in the future. We've given a reasonable point system to indicate that these are things that the city would like to see, but that we recognize that they will require private maintenance. And that came out of public meetings where the public said, yeah, we'd like these amenities, but who's going to maintain them? So we're making it clear that it's a private developer. In terms of public realm improvement, that's things like streetscape improvements, it's trees, funds to a neighborhood facility. And then my favorite, as we've been working in Brockton, there are brooks everywhere in Brockton, but they're frequently hidden, they're often impaired. And so the idea, both with downtown and Trout Brook area and Campello, which has French Brook and the Salisbury Plain River, Rob indicated the civic space that we're hoping to, coming out of the Campello neighborhood plan, hoping to create an incentive for a walkway. Funds towards a brook renaturalization is important for those areas. And so a developer can get to the number of stories by getting the appropriate number of points by providing a combination of benefits. This is structured so one benefit isn't going to get them to the maximum number of stories. They've got to stack the benefits in order to get to that maximum. And we think that's important to share with the Brockton community the benefits of development beyond just the uses and the physical appearance of the buildings. We want to expand that beyond that. And there's precedents in some other cities, but we've really targeted these requirements to the needs of Brockton based on the public planning. And Rob, if you turn to the next 2 pages, just flip through those, you'll see some of the benefits we were describing. Walkways along a restored brook, eating and dining along the brooks, plazas that have significant landscaping and green space to address both stormwater management and the heat island impact, and areas of seating, water fountains, places where people of all ages can gather and they don't have to pay to be there, which is really important in a community that has a wide variety of income ranges as well. So everybody should be welcome to these spaces. With that, Rob, I will turn it back to you for next steps. And
Thank you, Emily. So this draft was introduced into City Council a couple of weeks ago. That has been referred to the Planning Board in the Ordinance Committee. This is the Planning Board's public hearing where we will take testimony or comments from the public. The documents have been on file on the city's webpage, the Planning Department's webpage, where you can review them or download them, or you can come into our offices, which are currently at the Shaw Center, and we will make a copy available to you for review if you want to actually sit there with a hard copy of it. Once we have hopefully voted this evening to favorably recommend this to the City Council, we will have another hearing at the Ordinance Committee. And then it'll go to City Council for its final vote. Now, the Ordinance Committee has asked that we hire a consultant to help them analyze this new legislation. It's a big ask. We understand that. And it took us a really long time to write this. And we had hoped to have had this in to City Council a lot earlier. But things being what they are, and the amount of time it took for us to consult with the community and to make sure that we got it right, we ended up on a very short time schedule. So we're hoping that it will be through City Council and adopted by them by December 31st of this year, so that we remain in compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. And I think that is the end of the presentation. Thank you for your view. So that is the end.
Very nice. A lot of
It
information.
went forever.
It was a lot of information, but it was a nice presentation. A lot of work and detail went into this, especially like, the detail around green space, thinking about climate change and retaining our historic buildings and windows and trims and industrial buildings for work. How does this, I didn't hear about a point system or requirements for like lighting or traffic studies or parking. I might have missed it because there was a lot of information. I apologize if I did.
No, there are standards for lighting. There's standards for parking and what we call it mobility. So it includes automobiles and bicycles. There are whole chapters on that. It was a lot to, if we wanted to present that, we'd be here all night. But we've made the parking a little bit more flexible. We're recommending that City Council adopt a minimum of 2 parking spaces per unit, but you can get relief from that by doing several different steps. So of a transit station, you can decrease to a certain point. If you're in a quarter mile, you decrease even more. If you do shared parking, you get this kind of benefit. If you bring on a car share activity like a zip car, you can remove that's available to your residents. You can reduce a number of additional parking spaces. If you make more bike parking spaces, you can get a reduction in parking spaces. So it's set up in a way that there is a give and take instead of going to the zoning board and just saying, I want to be free of all of this. And the zoning board saying, sure, go ahead. We're giving you something. We're giving you a relief from parking. You should give us something back. And so there's a very detailed strategy for dealing with that.
Thank you. Questions from other board members?
Yeah, I have a handful of questions if I could. I didn't hear, you may have had this on there, but the sketch was so small I couldn't see it. Is there a standard for sidewalk size? I know in the building process, we seem to have clashes on what the standard should be or what's expected or what's asked. Is there a certain standard for sidewalks?
Yes, there is. And one of the slides that we didn't put in here, in addition to the different base districts, there's also a grading of streets.
Mm-hmm.
And so depending on their intensity of use and the traffic, there you go, the traffic activity, you could be a primary street, a secondary street, a tertiary or transitional street, or a residential street. And each one of those has a different sidewalk requirement. In our ordinance, what we're proposing is a new setback line that allows for the expansion of sidewalks into the private property that is offset by giving the developers increased residential density and mixed use by right. So you may have to step back 2 feet, 3 feet from the existing edge of the sidewalk, and we call it a curb setback. And so on the busiest streets, the primary streets, we want to see a 15-foot wide sidewalk that increases pedestrian safety. It allows us to add more public amenities, and it creates a much more pleasant environment because the traffic that is on those streets is the heaviest, it's moving the fastest. You want to be able to step away from the travel lanes as somebody who's walking. As you go down, it goes from 15 to 12 to 8 to 6. So a residential street should have a 6-foot sidewalk. Transitional streets are 12 feet, or 8 feet, and then 12 feet is a secondary street. Example of a secondary street might be Montello or North Montello, where there's a lot of traffic, but there's less active first floor uses. And so you're trying to move people to the train station, not from store to store. So you don't need as much activity on the street.
Okay.
I hope that answers that.
It certainly does. It seems like you have a plan for it, which I think we needed. So that's great. I've got a few more. Uniformity, especially with signage on mixed use, especially like, for example, the picture behind me. Store signage, is there any type of uniformity for that?
There is a whole section on signs, and it covers not only the size of signs, but where they are allowed on certain buildings. So there, in most buildings, you'll have what's called the sign bar, which is an area that's right between the first floor and the second floor. But you might have signs that have blade signs, or that have a canopy sign, or I don't remember what we called it, a marquee sign, but it's at the top of a building. You might see a sign, of a big, bio lab might be building, and you want, somebody's name up at the top of the building. But it goes through in very detailed text and drawings as to how signs should be addressed in these districts.
Okay. Also, by right usage, and any of the usages, are things like rooftops or sidewalk usage as far as, are these all going to be by permit or any of that kind of stuff kind of baked into the new zoning?
A lot of this is baked into the new zoning. We encourage green roofs and green and roof patios. And as a matter of fact, you get some of your green score can come from a green roof. The sidewalk widths allow for the sidewalk zone is divided up into, there's usually a what they used to call a carriage walk, but that's the closest to the street. Then you'll have an area that is for landscaping and seating. Then you'll have the next area, which is for pedestrian activity for walking. And then you'll have a section that's closest to the building, and that's where you might have your outdoor space. You'll have retail displays, or you might have some outdoor seating for a little cafe. So this is all taken into consideration, and certain uses are allowed by right in those areas.
Okay. And my last question, Madam Chair kind of touched on this. Incentivized zoning, that's a big thing. That's New York does a lot of it. It's not limited to that table, correct? Because what if we needed, for example, say in the future, we don't need what was listed there, but we have a priority to say a school. Could that be prioritized instead?
The great thing about schools, it is a civic building, and a civic building is allowed in all districts. So if we need to build a school or a library or a park, the city can go ahead and do that. What's nice about the incentive zoning is that one of the options is to pay into a fund that could be used to build activities, whether it's a playground or park that's available to the public, or could go towards building a new facade on the library or things like that. So there is some flexibility baked into that incentive zoning.
So, for example, like a 10 projects could essentially equal one new school, something like that. It could be a combination of all these things coming together.
10
Not
really
10,
big
but whatever it
projects.
takes, whatever it may take.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's all I've got. Thank you very much.
I just have
Thank
one
you.
question. So with the incentive zoning, is there a review process, or like an approval process, or is it just?
Yes, it comes through the planning board.
Okay.
And so the incentive is a special permit process. We're recommending to the city council that the planning board be the special permit granting authority. I know there are some ordinance committee members who would like to keep that as the zoning board of appeals. My personal philosophy is that the zoning board of appeals is just that. If you don't get the outcome that you need from the planning board, or the ordinance doesn't fit what you need, then you appeal it to the zoning board. But special permits can easily be handled by the planning board through the site plan review process. And I think it's a lot easier, and it streamlines the process if the planning board were to do that.
Awesome.
But
yeah, I just wanted to make sure that
ultimately
there was
it's up to
some
the
type of
city.
approval.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Yolanda, any questions, or Marty?
Yeah, I do, Madam Chair. Rob, will you just say that again? You had some pushback from the zoning board about this, or the ordinance committee?
We've had the chairman of the zoning board of appeals on our review committee, and he is recommending that the planning board in these districts be the special permit granting authority. City council is a little, this is the way it's always been done, and I'm not being disrespectful for anyone, but they're just used to it being the zoning board of appeals. And I think that if we have an engaged conversation with them and explain that special permit granting authorities are the planning boards in a lot of other communities in Massachusetts, and that it's a part of the site plan review process, and it reduces some of the time. Right now, if you need a special permit, you'll come to the zoning board, and that takes a good month, maybe 2, maybe 3, and then you have to come to the planning board, and that could take 2
Crazy.
months. So why not shorten this up? We have very strict criteria on how a special permit is granted and what is allowed as a special permit. And you'll see that in the zoning text that was sent to all of you. So I think if we hang on to some hope, we might be able to keep that authority with you.
It sounds as though it would really streamline the process, which honestly needs to be streamlined. And also the fact that Ken Galligan is for this, is that what you said?
He supports the idea, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Yolando, anything?
I only have a question post-build, Rob. Yeah, how do we ensure that stuff is actually executed in the right way and that folks actually implemented, the different incentives that they promised the community?
In the zoning code, in this zoning code, so any development that happens in these districts, before you get a certificate of occupancy, meaning before anybody can move into that building, you have to go and deliver to the planning department a as-built plan, which shows everything that's been done to the property. If there's 10 trees, there better be 10 trees on the plan. And we go out and inspect those properties, and then we can then release the application for a certificate of occupancy, so that the zoning department, the building department doesn't just, they got close enough. We have a lot of that going on in Brockton. If this is what the community wants, this is the plan that you have adopted and approved, and that's the plan that should be built. And so in order to do that, you need to come back with a plan and an as-built plan. And then periodically throughout the years, we'll go out and check. We'll send staff out and do an inspection. And so if you have 10 trees and 8 of them are now dead, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to ask the city to pull your occupancy permit and push everybody out of the building. However, that it's impractical. So, but what happens is that becomes a violation of their site plan approval. And so each day that those trees are dead or not replaced becomes a violation. Those fines add up. Now, I can't hold a gun to your head and make you pay those, but when you come to refinance that property, those are all a lien, and you have to pay that. So it gives the property owner some incentive to make sure that you build what you say you're going to build and that you maintain what you built. We have too many absentee landlords who come in and get away with murder, and then, there's nothing that we can do to enforce it on it. This zoning has some enforcement activity on it.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here from the public, Mr. May?
I am flipping that up now. Hang on just a second. Ladies and gentlemen from the public, if you have a question or would like to make a comment, please use the raise your hand icon at the bottom of your screen. If you hover your cursor over the bottom of the screen, you'll see a menu pop up and a raise hand icon. And we have one person who would like to speak at the moment, and that's Veronica Stevens. So Veronica,
Hello.
your mic is open.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
God bless you all. This has been too long in the making. I'm so grateful for all of your work. I am overwhelmed by what I hear, and I am sitting here thinking if it had been done 5, 10 years ago, we would have a lot less problem. I'm grateful for all of you for the questions that the committee has all, I mean, the board members, sorry, have all come up with. I have had 7 of the questions myself, and you asked them all. Most importantly, the last topic that you were on, the authority, site plan inspections. I can't talk enough about them, but I'm going to hold my tongue. I'm sure you're all grateful.
We know your history.
You do. And it's wonderful to know that this has got the content of progress, and it gives a cohesive plan for everybody that wants to build in Brockton. A wonderful place to do it if you can get what you need. And this gives it
Yes.
all out in black and white. I'm wondering, how will this be available to the possibility of the fairgrounds? Because if they had had this option, it might have, their plan may have gone through with less feedback.
Hoopla. Ms. Stevens, that is a very good question. And as you saw earlier on in the presentation, we showed that while this current iteration only covers 2 districts and includes downtown Trout Brook and the Campello neighborhood, we are doing master plans and studies in the Montello neighborhood and around the Good Samaritan Medical Center. But this ordinance was written in such a way that it has enough flexibility that it can deal with other places in the city. So, for example, this could be mapped on the fairgrounds, not necessarily the neighborhood residential, but you might see more of the mixed use, the commercial core, some of the commercial industrial. Those would be permitted, or those would be good places to map that. Likewise,
and they could apply for a special permit to use one of those zones.
Yes, they could.
Excellent. I thank you all, and I really appreciate what you've done and what you've put together and the time that it's taken. And I solely,
Thank you, ma'am.
wholly support it. Rob, please
Thank
call
you very
me.
much. Will
Thank
do.
you, Veronica.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
You're welcome. Any other hands raised?
Madam Chair, not at this time.
Okay.
If there are no more questions from the board members, I would ask you to make 2 findings. One, that this proposed zoning it is in what's the word I'm looking for? It's not in conflict. It supports the citywide comprehensive plan, a blueprint for Brockton. And the other finding is that it supports the downtown action strategy and the Campello master plans, which you have both reviewed and approved in past meetings. And then there needs to be a motion to favorably recommend this zoning back to the city council for their consideration.
Okay, so we start with a motion for the 2 findings, or are these included in the motion back to the city ordinance?
I would include them in the motion, and we can write those out.
Okay.
But it's in compliance. That's the word I was looking for, with the blueprint for Brockton, which is the citywide comprehensive plan.
The compliance. All right, is there a motion?
So I'll motion to recommend favorably that this is in compliance with the blueprint for Brockton, the downtown action strategy, and the Campello plan.
I second.
Are we going to include that with the motion back to the?
Yeah, sure. Back to the full city council.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Roll
Fighting
call.
over it.
James Sweeney,
Yes.
Yolando,
Yes.
Marty,
Marty's on mute.
Marty,
Yes.
There she goes.
Matthew,
Yes.
Tony Gonzalez, yes. All right, all favorable. Thank you. any other business for this evening?
Madam Chair, there is no other business this evening.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
To adjourn.
Second.
Okay, roll call. James Sweeney,
Yes.
Yolanda Spinola,
Yes.
Marty Crowell,
Yes.
Matthew Gallagher,
Yes.
Tony Gonzalez, yes. All right, thank you, everyone.